I'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Barrett. Dr. Damien Barrett is our next speaker, and I believe we met back at Budapest a number of years ago, and enjoyed meeting Dr. Barrett. He is a veterinarian with the Department of Agriculture, Food, and Marine at Sligo in Ireland. And Dr. Barrett is going to talk about an epidemiological study of a pneumonia outbreak of an Irish beef feedlot. So Dr. Barrett, please welcome Dr. Barrett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. And I'd just like to bring you through a case control study we carried out of a respiratory disease outbreak in a large Irish feedlot. This was a large-scale finisher in the northwest of Ireland, and he was in a bull beef system where he was finishing continental bulls within a 16-month spec. They had to be 16 months of age so that they qualify for a special price from the beef processor. This meant that he had to source younger bulls to achieve this, and it was on a zero grazing system where they were housed. There was a high carbohydrate diet, and the farmer complained of a high incidence of pneumonia in 2014. From this outbreak, we detected IBR, Mycoplasma bovis, and Mannheimia hemolytica, and I've reason to believe that there were other respiratory pathogens involved in this outbreak as well. This farmer purchased from a wide variety of cattle markets, predominantly in the west of Ireland, and they were travelling quite large distances, and he was purchasing them from August to November. So the farmer provided me data on 189 cattle, where it was him that provided the diagnosis. And I know there's a speaker here going to talk about a more defined or refined type of diagnosis, but this was the farmer-based diagnosis. And of these 40 animals had a history of respiratory disease, and 149 were healthy. We got data from the AIM database, which is the Irish National Registration and Movement Database for cattle, and this involved the tag number, the date of birth, the date of purchase, and the mart through which they were sold. From the ICBF, the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation, we got mart weight data, average daily gains, carcass weight, and grades at slaughter. And the analysis I'm going to present to you now involves descriptive statistics and logistic regression. And just to point out that while I might be showing you associations with the health warning on all epidemiologists put forward, is that the associations aren't necessarily causative. So the first thing we looked at here was the month of purchase, and I suppose the most striking thing about the month of purchase here was that animals bought in August were less likely to succumb to respiratory disease. The predominant breed, as James would have alluded to down there, was Charolais. That's the predominant breed of beef farmers in Ireland. In terms of a carcass grade, there was no obvious effect in terms of carcass grade between the cases and the controls, although there was a marginal, you could marginally detect a slight improvement in grades among animals that hadn't a history of respiratory disease. The interesting thing about this slide is if this A isn't a mart at all. This refers to where the farmer bought directly from another farm and where there was no purchased through a cattle market, where it was a direct farm-to-farm movement. And then we looked at the marts. There was no mart effect as such. Then now we're looking at means here between the case controls, and the health warning on means is that means there can be wide variations that means don't take account of. But if we look at these, the case animals were on average 4 days younger at purchase. They spent an extra 4 days on the farm. They were 19 kilograms lighter at purchase, and at slaughter they were 13 kilograms lighter. The average daily gain over the lifetime was reduced by about 0.1 kilo per day, but during their time in the feedlot, their average daily gain was reduced by 0.17 kilos per day. And this is the model, the logistic regression model that we developed from this. And these are the variables that were significant in the final model. And these were the age at purchase, the month of purchase, and the lifetime average daily gain, as opposed to the feedlot daily gain. And if we just look at the calf age, for each additional age at purchase, there was a 0.01 decrease in the odds of pneumonia. So basically, the odds of pneumonia decreased by 0.5 for each 50-day increase in age at purchase. The reasons why younger calves may be at greater risk is that these are most likely to be a shorter time weaned. They're more susceptible because they're exposed. They're going to because it's been shorter since they were weaned. They're more susceptible to stress, and at that age, there's likely to be limited concentrate consumption. And remember, these bulls were going into a feedlot situation where it was concentrate feeding. The month of purchase was also an interesting finding. For each subsequent month, the odds of pneumonia increased by 2. So an animal that was purchased in November was twice as likely to experience pneumonia as an animal that was purchased in October. Now, this graph here that I've put in here is just coincides with from the Department of Agriculture as annual veterinary laboratory service report. And what we look at here is that the peak of pneumonia in these there's a seasonal occurrence, particularly of RSV PI3, and this peak is associated with the peak in the sales of weanlings. And we know that cattle movement is a known risk factor for the occurrence of bovine respiratory syncytial virus. And at the same time, where we have this movement, we've got animals that are most likely moving into a house situation. Just in terms of some methodological issues, I'm acutely aware of the fact that this was a relatively small sample size, but the findings of this are quite similar to a US study involving 9 million cattle over 8 years in 4 states. So that gave me a lot of reassurance. The other issue which some people may consider a weakness here was that the diagnosis was carried out by the farmer. Now, what I would say in this farmer's favour, that he was a very experienced farmer. We didn't have the resources to carry out veterinary diagnosis, and most importantly, this was a retrospective study that we were looking back over time rather than a prospective study. So, just in conclusion, there are significant costs of pneumonia, 0.1 kilo per loss in performance over the lifetime of the animal. There's the treatment costs, there's the labour, and there's the mortality. And based on this study, particularly for this farm, we would recommend purchasing older bulls earlier in the season. And I'd just like to acknowledge the practitioner who referred this case to us, Dr. William Byrne in the Central Veterinary Laboratory, who helped me with from the mycoplasma end of things. This originated as an investigation into a mycoplasma outbreak, and Dr. Liz Lane from the Department of Agriculture provided me with the AIM data, and Tracy Clegg from Severa, who helped me with the statistical analysis. So, Mr. Chairman, any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Again, our speaker has done a wonderful job of leaving time for questions, so please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you, please.
Down there.
Yep.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Tim Geraghty from SRUC in Scotland. I wondered, the slide you showed with the different marts where they had been purchased, and you said that point A was not a mart, that was direct farm transfer.
Yes.
Did you run that just as mart yes or no?
I had a different, no, it wasn't simple, it was mart 1, 2, 3. We didn't run it mart yes or no.
Do you
And
think?
that would be well worth running. Yes,
Yeah.
that's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, fine.
Could you elaborate on how the BRSV and the BRSV and PI3 were diagnosed?
The BRSV wasn't diagnosed. I'm suspecting that it was there, but it wasn't actually detected. The IBR was detected by real-time PCR.
Hi, Edward Timsit from Calgary. You mentioned a difference in average daily gain. What statistical test have you done to really show this difference? Is this just comparison of mean, or what test have you done?
It was based on a logistic regression.
And the p-value of that?
0.02.
Okay, but that's there's factors. Okay.
Dermot Sparrow, Moss Veterinary, Ireland. We've had a lot of problems that are very similar to this incidence that you've described. And we find that Mycoplasma bovis is playing a very large part in these problems, and history goes back 8 or 10 years on farms that actually do this. And we feel that Mycoplasma bovis is an underrated and misunderstood problem that starts much earlier in its transmission, and it ends up with chronic respiratory disease and chronic joint problems with welfare and all the various other associations. And I regard it as one of the biggest headaches in modern bovine practice. I'd like to hear what your opinion is.
My experience of that, I've had experience of Mycoplasma bovis in outbreaks such as this, and also in dairy herds, and I would agree with you, it's very difficult to deal with. What we put in place on that farm, I didn't go into the detail on the history. The vaccination history and that was incomplete. It was vaccinating. The farmer was vaccinating predominantly for IBR. There was no RSV PI3 vaccination going on, so we recommended that be put in place. And we also recommended around the issues of say stress reduction mechanisms and all stuff you're quite familiar with. But to me, I think the single issue that probably brought about the most change on that farm was putting in an RSV PI3 vaccination program, because basically my simple understanding of mycoplasma is it's probably coming in there on top of a viral pneumonia, and if you can, and on a pasture-based system here in Ireland, the first line of attack is probably parasites through lungworm, followed by viral pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, Mannheimia, and then my understanding is that then mycoplasma comes along, and that if you can break the chain earlier on, say either through a combination of the parasitology or the lungworm and the viral, there's a lesser probability of mycoplasma, but it's not a simple disease to deal with. I accept completely.
I actually had a question. When he was buying calves on a continuous basis, was he just putting them in with the ones he already had there, or were they starting in a separate pen?
That was actually another issue that we changed. There was all sorts of mixing going on, and that we actually we put them in that tried to batch them as they arrived as part of the control program. But prior to that, there would have been mixing. And you see, this was I'm only talking here about 189 animals. This was a farm that finishes 3,000 bulls per annum. So we're only looking at a small subset.
All right, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Barrett.